The internet, we all use it all the time. We find information on Google, we shop on Amazon, we connect with friends on Facebook, we watch videos on YouTube. The internet seems like a blessing, but could it also be a curse? This book explores the dark side of the internet from a psychological perspective. Our author, Professor Ashesh Mukherjee, is an associate professor of marketing at Desautels, an expert on consumer psychology and online consumer behavior. His research has been published in academic journals such as Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Consumer Psychology, and Journal of Advertising, and he has presented at conferences all around the world. So what sparked his interest to write this book? Well, from what he told me, it started in India in the 70s, where Ash grew up. It was then a socialist economy. There was no phones, no television at home, and certainly no internet. He then went on to pursue his PhD in the 90s at the University of Texas at Austin, when the dot-com boom started and the digital economy was born. So he has had a ringside view of the internet from its beginning in the 90s to its central role in our life today. He has since dedicated much of his research career trying to understand how the internet influences consumers, for good and for bad. We are fortunate that he has now decided to bring his research to an audience beyond academia through his first published book. We are equally delighted to hear from our co-discussant this morning, a dear friend of Desautels and McGill, Mr. Bertrand Cesvet. Bertrand leads a global powerhouse creative agency called Sid Lee, known the world over for its originality and unique business model. In his role of CEO, he has played a key role in the agency by acquiring world-class mandates with Adidas, Red Bull, Cirque du Soleil, Dom Pérignon, and Dare, just to name a few. An MBA alumnus of Desautels and an honorary doctorate recipient of McGill, Bertrand is a loyal supporter of this university and is often seen giving talks to our students who aspire to be just like him. A modern-day Renaissance man, Bertrand also wrote the best-selling book, Conversation Capital, How to Create Stuff People Love to Talk About. We are proud to have you as a McGill ambassador, Bertrand. Thank you for facilitating this morning's discussion. Now, and without further ado, please join me in welcoming our two speakers.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ash.
Good morning.
Well, you know, sometimes it's really interesting because in our business we say that for ideas and, you know, to work, they have to be resonant with the time. Now, you know, the context, therefore, is extremely important when an idea comes to the world. I don't think there could be actually a better context to launch this book than right now. You know, if we look at everything that's happened over the past few weeks around, you know, Facebook, among others, and, you know, the Cambridge Analytica, yeah, I think we can call it a scandal. You know, now it looks like these companies are, a lot of the companies that are dominating the internet are being extremely challenged in their business model. So when I read your book, I said, you know, this guy's a prophet, right? Can I?
I've been called many things.
because it reads a little bit like a prophecy. It's very interesting. It's called The Internet Trap. And you know, you address, I think that the going in assumption is very interesting. You know, we all know the internet is free. We all believe it is free, but actually, you know, it's not. There's a cost to the internet. And in the book, you know, you discuss 5 costs of living online, human and psychological costs mainly of living online. Can you tell me how, when you started the book, and you know, how did you research it? Because you know, what's also interesting is, you know, this is a pretty well documented, and you know, you've leaned on your years of experience as an academic to document what you've done. But tell us a little bit about the genesis of the book and how you've gone about writing it.
Yes, yes. So, you know, when I started, as Isabel very kindly mentioned, you know, the genesis of this book is that when I grew up in a different world. You know, it was a world certainly without the internet. My students are here. They'll laugh at me when I say this, but we didn't have a television set at home because no one did. And we didn't have a telephone because there was a 20-year waiting list for a black telephone that went like this. And so that was the world I grew up. And so, you know, if someone had told me about the internet then, things we take for granted, you know, buying things in the middle of the night, booking airline tickets to travel around the world, looking at reviews, I would have said, this is science fiction. You know, I used to read science fiction when I was young. And then it actually happened. So I look at the internet with fresh eyes, perhaps in a different way from people who are used to the internet, who grew up with the internet. And so because I look at it from an outsider's perspective, I think I'm able to see the full picture. And the full picture that came to me was that the internet has many benefits. You know, we have more information, we have more entertainment. But I also saw that there were certain downsides to the internet which weren't getting as much airtime in the popular media. And there was also a lot of research that was being done on this topic. So I did research personally on technophobia when I did my PhD. And so that is a negative reaction to high-tech products. A lot of people are technophobic. And that gets lost, you know, in the hype about technology. I've also done some research on social media and how social media can be bad for us, because people only post their good pictures on Facebook. No one posts their bad pictures. And so the question is, you know, what effect does it have on consumers? And what we find is that people feel envious. You know, there's shopping therapy. So we have done studies where we have analyzed people's pictures posted on Facebook, and we have found that the vast majority are positive pictures, and that leads to more browsing on Amazon thereafter. So in my own research and based on my own upbringing, you know, I found this topic to be very interesting and relevant. And then, of course, as you said, there are these topical things, you know, which I didn't anticipate when I started the book, about Facebook and about fake news, which also kind of is relevant, and I talk about that in the book as well.
So in the book, you talk about you know, the 5 costs of living online, and I'm just going to outline them very quickly for now. The first one is too many temptations. I think that we can all relate to that. The second cost is too much information. You know, that's another very relatable one. Too much customization. We'll talk about it. This one's interesting because it's not as obvious as the first two. Too many comparisons and too little privacy. When I read the book, I you know, I think there's something you really it gets to you because because it gets you thinking about how we raise our children, how we lead our lives, how we behave in the world, and all of a sudden there's this notion of, you know, for instance, when you discuss, you know, too many temptations, you talk about, you know, internet use as a form of addiction. Do you believe that, you know, people have become, there's such a thing as an addiction to the internet?
Well, you have to define addiction. So, you know, if you define addiction in the way it's defined in research, which is that it's an activity that interferes with your normal responsibilities in life, then, you know, there are certain types of addiction which are more common on the internet. So gaming, for example. internet games. So it's more bigger problem amongst younger consumers. It's a bigger problem in certain countries. So South Korea, for example, has very high rates of internet game addiction, internet shopping. So the number is about 6 to 7% of the population compulsively spends money online. So if you define it in that sense, there is a addiction component to it. But I think in a more general sense, I think all of us will recognize that sometimes we end up spending more time online than we wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
We go online and before you know it, a couple of hours have passed. Now, is that addiction? Maybe not, but it is certainly a temptation that the internet presents to us. And the question is, how can we deal with it? Mm-hmm. And what are the psychological reasons why the internet is especially tempting? Because there are a lot of tempting things in the world. You have television, you have movies, you have a lot of things. But I talk about in the book that the internet is especially tempting because all you see are ideal states. You see the best products from around the world. It's a barrage of ideal states. And it's also tailored. So Google, Facebook, Google knows what you search, Facebook knows who you are. And they present advertisements and products to you, and Amazon as well, which are tailored to you. So they're uniquely attractive to you. And this is new because this tailoring was not possible before. And the whole business model, the profits of Google and Facebook come from this ability from knowing you and giving you exactly what fits your preferences.
When you, as someone who works sadly in the, sometimes in the world of advertising, because I get up in the morning. It's a bit ironic that I'm doing this interview because I sometimes, as I get into
we're on opposite sides of the table.
Late midlife, sometimes I get up in the morning and I'm saying like, what do I really do in life? And I try to create need for people, that they don't have. So, but it's, for instance, in making, and too much information, I think that, which is the second cause that you discussed, there's this notion that, typically the framework is you need information to make decisions. Now you make a very strong point that there's this overabundance of information is actually inducing choice paralysis. Can you expand a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I mean, the conventional wisdom is that, and this is the economic perspective on markets, is that consumers are rational decision makers, and they will make better decisions if they're in possession of all the information.
Yeah.
Why not? Give them everything, and then they'll sort through it, and they'll make the right choice after plowing through all the information. But in the real world, what actually happens is that when people see too much information, they start using shortcuts, because people don't like to think in depth, and that's a fundamental characteristic of human thinking.
And it's, I think you refer to that also as an impediment to learning, right?
That too. So if you think about, so there's a famous experiment I talk about in the book. It's called the jam experiment. Yeah. It was done in California, where they changed the display of jams in a gourmet store. So one day they had 24 types of jam, other day they had 3 varieties of jam. And so what they found, surprisingly, was that sales was higher when there was only 3 jams. Sales was lower when there were 24 types of jam. And you can think of different psychological reasons why this might happen. One is that having more options is more challenging in order to make a choice, because you have to compare different options, and people just walk away without making a choice. The other kind of reason for this is that people might, if they have too many choices, they might think, what if I'm missing out on a good option? So if you choose one option, you might anticipate regret. What if I chosen the other option? Would I have been better off? And the same applies when you're shopping online for products. If you pick one product, you're giving up on the others. And so that anticipated regret, it's called buyer's remorse, in other words. Yeah. So that might also hold people back from too much information, might actually paradoxically, reduce sales. So that's an interesting implication.
The next part of your book is, I thought was extremely, as I said, now I'm going to call you a prophet, but I don't know if you read, but last week Mark Zuckerberg gave an interview to the New York Times, and he said, he could have never, when he started Facebook, he could have never anticipated that it would become something that is as powerful as it is today, that can rig elections, that can spread fake news, and he was recognizing that somehow, like the toothpaste had come out of the tube, and then claiming that it would take 2 years to fix Facebook. But in your next chapter, you refer to too much customization and the very strong idea that there's an echo chamber effect from social media. I thought that was a very interesting thought. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So if you think about fake news, and fake news is an illustration of that concept. So if you go back to the Facebook scandal that you just talked about, there are actually two aspects to the Facebook story. So one aspect is a privacy aspect. So if you haven't heard of the Facebook story, what happened was a company called Cambridge Analytica, they put an app on Facebook, and those who downloaded the app, Cambridge was able to harvest their Facebook data. So everything they'd done on Facebook, their friends list, what articles they read, what they had liked, everything. And so what Cambridge was able to download was 50 million Facebook users, because not just the people who downloaded, but their friends as well. So that's, by the way, 25% of the US potential voters. It's a large data set. And so they took that. So that's kind of a violation of privacy, because most people are not aware that apps can actually access their private information. So a question is, why do people provide their private information to Facebook? And I talk about that in the book. There are psychological reasons why people are not so concerned with privacy when they're on Facebook. Because privacy is an abstract concept. Yeah. Whereas, when you go on Facebook, there's more concrete things. You're reading posts, you're posting, and concrete dominates abstract in people's thinking. So that's the privacy side.
The privacy gap that you refer to.
The fake news is the second angle to the Facebook scandal. That's related to echo chamber. So once Cambridge Analytica has this database of 50 million consumers, what they can do is they can segment. They can say, okay, these people are likely to be Republican voters based on what articles they've read, who their friends are, and where they live, because they're red states and blue states. These people are likely to be Democratic voters. These people are probably undecideds. Now, after you segment, then you can send messages, aka fake news, to each of these segments. And so for the Republican voters, you can send any story, negative story about Hillary Clinton. It can be a crazy story. It can be that she's running a child abduction ring. It can be that she's seriously ill, that she's on her deathbed. These are all fake news. And because of a psychological concept called confirmation bias, people are ready to believe things which are consistent with their pre-existing opinions. Fake news finds very fertile ground in Republican supporters. For undecideds, there's another psychological idea, which is repetition. So you might have heard of the saying that repeat a lie 1,000 times, it becomes the truth. Yeah. And so fake news, if you keep sending a steady stream of negative news stories to the undecideds, at some point the mud will stick. And so that's how it works. For the Democratic voters, the way fake news works is that even if you're a Democratic voter, you're going to have certain reservations about the candidate. So Hillary Clinton, her weakness is that she's perceived to be untrustworthy, or she's, takes donations from big banks. And so you can send out fake news focusing on those weaknesses. And this applies not just to the US election. I mean, Justin Trudeau has weaknesses too. And so you have to find the weakness, and you have to send out fake news. And then, this is going to work psychologically.
Another part which was, in your book, which I think became almost more philosophical than others, it's this notion of comparison, too many comparisons. How people are there was something almost spiritual in your book about, and it's funny because Dean Baget referred to your upbringing in Calcutta and basically, living in a society where there's basically two ways of perceiving yourself. Perceiving yourself as, driving a sort of ascendancy in your life and trying to compare yourself with people who are doing better than you, and at the same time failing to consider people that are not faring quite as well as you are. Tell me a little bit about how personal this was for you, growing up in India and coming to North America, going to UT Texas.
Yes.
And now being a professor here and living in these two worlds. How much has that shaped this?
I think it's a broad question, and if I were to bring it back to the social comparison kind of angle to it, so I think one conclusion that we have seen in many research studies is that people automatically compare themselves to those who are better than themselves. This is ingrained in human thinking, and it comes from various sources. There's a norm of competition in modern societies, so we all want to get ahead, so we're always looking at who's doing well, and we want to imitate, get ahead of them. There's an evolutionary theory, survival of the fittest, so you want to be the fittest. You can also think of social comparisons as being part of the social structure. So going back to India, the society I grew up in was very hierarchical. So there's a caste system, and that's what you see, and there's upper caste and lower caste. So all of these factors come together to make it more likely that you will do upward social comparisons, that you look around and say, who's better than me? And if you go on Facebook, this is what happens. You see postings by people of beautiful holidays in Vegas and Instagram pictures of perfect meals, and you're always comparing, and you're thinking your life is not as good as that. And then you want to compensate for that by, going for holidays yourself or by shopping on Amazon. And then it's a vicious cycle, because then you post those pictures and the whole cycle starts again. So I think upward social comparisons are a part of human nature. And we are seeing the internet in many ways is an enabler of some of the weaknesses in our thinking.
Yeah, it's sort of exploiting a basic human flaw.
Yes.
And finally, we've touched on this very briefly earlier on, but there's this notion of the privacy gap. I mean, the fact that people are willing, because something is free, right? Because I don't have to pay for Facebook, because most of the things I do online, I'm not appear to be free. Therefore, I become more willing to tell the whole world about everything I am.
Yeah, I think there's a saying that, if something is free, then you're the product.
Yeah.
So if they're not charging, there is a catch. There's always a catch, right? So the thing about free, so again, psychologically, it's been shown that people are very susceptible to free offers. And students probably know this, because if you set up a table in Bronfman and you offer anything free, you'll have a long line of people. Especially donuts, right?
It's the same.
So free is very important. Free is very important. And so you can see that many of these online digital businesses, their business model is based on free. So it's freemium, or take the app for free, then they'll build up the market share, and then after that we'll see, how to monetize it. So a lot of this is based on free. And so Facebook is free. So once it's free, people want to keep it free, and so they will overlook a lot of downside, a lot of risks. They'll give up their information. They won't think too much about what bad things could happen, because free is important to them. And so that's, I think, one of the reasons why people are blind to the privacy implications. There's also the idea that privacy is an abstract thing, and abstract things don't really influence us. There's also other factors I talk about in the book. When you go on these websites, they actually it's mandated that they have these privacy disclosures. They have the long documents. But people don't like to think in depth. So we have done research to find out whether people read. No one reads it. They just say yes.
I can tell you that.
And it's not even longer ones. We have done research on, in Europe they have the cookie warning. So, if you go on a website, do you assent to cookies? So we tracked how much time they spent clicking on that. So initially it was 7 seconds, 8 seconds. Now it's 0.25 seconds.
Wow.
They can't be making a rational decision in 0.25 seconds.
In your book, I think that right now, so as I said, in the context we're in, a lot of people are looking at those internet giants, and there's some people are arguing for self-regulation. Of course, these people claim that they will self-regulate. Other people talk about government intervention. We should take stronger measure to control what happens on the internet. I think your book is more about what we can do as individuals. I think that it shows that the belief, that fundamentally as human beings, as internet users, we should take control over our internet lives.
Right.
Is that right?
Right. So there's two schools of thought. That there are these 5 causes, and then how do we address the cause? And so one school of thought is that there should be government regulation. The cookie warning is one example of government regulation. It could have an effect, but there are downsides to regulation. So if you think of government regulation, what's the most common example? Probably warnings on cigarette packs, right? That's a common example of government saying that we are going to regulate, we're going to educate the public. But do cigarette warnings work? The research is, the jury is still out, because a lot of research says that initially they work, and then people stop paying attention to it. The smoking rate is not really affected in the long run by it. So that's that. And then there is the other argument that regulation can inadvertently reduce innovation. If you have too many regulations, then that can stifle innovation. So that's that. I take my own research is on consumer psychology. So I take the view that if we think carefully about what we can do as individuals to be smarter users of the internet, that is going to pay off. It's more likely to pay off. So in the book, I talk about different techniques we could use. So for example, there is this research showing that if you have a screensaver on your phone or on your laptop of a person's face with the eyes looking at you, it's like eyes on you. So you don't feel anonymous anymore. And so, because anonymity is a reason for bad behavior. So you could have virtual eyes on you, so that's one technique. The other is you can use technology to increase your self-control. So wasting time online, there's software you can use that's going to lock you out of the internet for certain periods of time. So you could use that as well. You could, a kind of bigger approach, which I talk about in the book, is that the internet, because it has so many products, so many options, it kind of pushes us to think that we can make the best possible choice. We can get the best product in the world. But you'll go crazy if you go down that road, because you'll never be able to process all that information. There's always be something better out there. You'll spend too much time in the process. So what I say is that it's a good idea to have not a maximizing outlook, but a satisfying outlook for many of our decisions in life. Because many decisions are not worth that much thought and trouble. And so that might make us happier in the world of the internet.
So would you say that this is the first book that you write, and that's going to be available to a more general public outside of academia? And so would you say that this is the intent? This is launched. This is a big day for you.
Thank you.
As a prophet, you're
remember repetition.
You're launching the internet trap into the world today. What do you expect? You want this to make a dent into the universe. What is that dent?
Yeah, in a small way, I'll back up and I'll say the reason I started this book was not to change the world. I simply wanted to write for a larger audience, because the kind of work we do in academia, we do experiments, we do research, and then we write articles, which are technical articles, which are meant for a professional audience, so for other professors. So I've written articles which have been read by perhaps 50 to 100 of my colleagues, and that's it. No one else has probably read it, and it's because that's the nature of the beast. Those are technical articles. They're meant for people who have a PhD. And I've always thought that there are interesting ideas in research which could be of use to people out there. And at a certain stage in my career, I thought this might be the right time for me, now that I've done a fair bit of research and I've seen what others have done, to bring it to a larger audience so that it's a new kind of project for me. Because I wanted to keep myself fresh. I started like that. And then when I wrote this, I sent a copy to my mother, and she said, "Oh, finally I understand what you do for a living."
So it was all worth it then. A more personal question. It's funny because I read your book as a citizen. I read it as the CEO of a company that tries to sell stuff, to people. And stuff that they don't need most of the time, and
they don't know.
They don't know they need yet. But I read it also as a parent, and I know you have a young daughter. How is it growing up in your house? Knowing everything you know. I mean,
It is quite a contrast. I say, me, no television, and our daughter. So this is a tribute to Steve Jobs, I say, because she was less than a year old, and one day we realized that she had figured out how to swipe and select. So it goes to show that the way technology is designed now is, I wouldn't say childproof, it's designed for children, so that it literally, a child could do it, as they say. And so that's that. And it is true that today it's a world of technology, and she's already asking for a phone. She's 6 years old, so I can see the danger coming, down the road.
So when is she getting that phone?
So the thing is, so the way I approach it is, I don't believe in heavy-handed. So I'm a marketing professor. I believe in doing it indirectly rather than directly. Directly doesn't
Maybe
work.
we could partner on this.
Right. So she gets my company in the evening if she puts her iPad aside, and then I read books to her. And so I frame it in that sense, we'll do something different. And so indirectly, there's no screen time for a certain period of time in the evening. So I think that's important. I also, again, we do, I guess, things we did when we were young. We kind of generalize that to our children. When I was young, I used to be taken to the library by my mom. And so I take my kid to the library and we kind of hang out there for a while. I think it's things, if you model good behavior or behavior you think is good, I think people learn more from positive modeling rather than negative barriers.
Coercion and barriers.
Coercion. So that's my approach, really.
Good. Final question. Market is very volatile. I have a conference call with my stockbroker in a few minutes after this. What do I do with my, I bought Facebook. I got a good deal on Facebook. I think it went up to about, $325 a share. Today it's about $225, I think. What do I do with that stock? Knowing everything you know.
Isabel, Dean Bijou is the finance prof here. So
Okay.
I think social media serves a very important need and a purpose. It's not going away. Facebook once you have a certain scale, it's very difficult to displace a player, which is why all these companies burn a lot of cash gaining market share. Facebook is not going anywhere very soon, but it is true that in the digital world, Facebook could be replaced by another social network if if this kind of scandal keeps happening over and over again. And so that is the danger. And so we'll see, if Facebook tightens its privacy and avoids these scandals in the future, I still think they're going to make money because they have a treasure trove of information that no one else has. And advertisers like yourself are willing to pay for it. Yeah. And so that's the secret sauce of companies like Facebook. And they, like Coca-Cola has a secret formula, Facebook has a secret formula too. And we have Coke 100 years later, so good.
So, well, thank you, Ash. maybe we could turn to the room. I mean, do you have any questions for the author today? I think that a couple of questions in the front.
We have a mic back there.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's coming.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more with your 5 internet traps. And as we've just gotten the retail school approved last week, which is a major initiative, and clearly, you know, all the conferences I've been to on retail in the last, let's say, 8 months, focuses on those issues in a, I would say, a predatorial way from people like Facebook, Google, et cetera. And it irritates me to no end. And I feel there's a backlash, and some people are predicting a backlash around that. But Ash, what would be your recommendation for us as a school to be more aware, what would be your recommendations?
I wouldn't presume to, you know, make broad recommendations. I can talk about the implications of my book, perhaps, for a retail school. So when you have online retailing, which is the most direct connection to the book, one of the ideas which consumers are becoming more sensitive to is that their information is worth something. It shouldn't be given away free. A, it's worth something. B, they should have control over how the information is used. So, for example, in Europe, there is this trend towards, there's a right to be forgotten. So, if there's stuff which is about you on the internet, there should be a way for you to remove it, so that, because it's your information. So, consumers, I think, as a general trend, are becoming more sensitized to the fact that there's a lot of information about them out there, and they would like to have more control over that. They would like to have that monetized in some way or given credit for that. So any retailer who's able to do that, who's able to respect the data that's coming in and be transparent about that, might be responding to this consumer need. So I think that would be the first idea, that comes to my mind. Of course, there are other discussions in the book about online retailing. So if you think about how people buy online, if there are too many products, that increases the power of brands, because a brand is a shortcut for choice. So, if you're a retailer, which has a large selection of products, and that's the whole idea of the long tail, right? Unlike a regular store where there's limited shelf space, on the internet you have unlimited shelf space. And so what does that do? That really increases the power of big brands. So branding is going to become even more important in the world of online retailing. Mm-hmm. So I think these are the two major implications that I can think of.
Thank you.
Yes, student at last. Thank you.
Hi, Professor.
Yes.
I have a question about the effect of all this digitalization and more and more children are into internet and digital objects, more younger and younger. Mm-hmm. And do you think there is any effect on our mental capacities, such as memory? Because I feel like since I've been using objects such as phone, I was maybe 12 years old, and I wonder if my memory is affected by all this digitalization, because we do things faster and faster. We swipe more and more.
Yes. It's a good question, and there's two kinds of research which might be relevant to your question. One is that people's attention span has been reducing, in the sense that now people are multitasking more and more. So it's not you, but other students in my class, when I'm teaching, I can see that they have other things going on. And so there is research that shows that multitasking reduces the ability to focus on one task in depth. And so that might be something to think about. The other implication which I talk about in the book is called the Google effect on memory, that if you use Google a lot to find information, people become very confident that they know a lot about a subject, whereas they actually don't. So people misattribute, the ease of accessing Google as knowledge that they have in their own head. So the question is, of course, the truth is, rote memorization is also not a good thing. You need to be able to think creatively, but you need a certain installed base of knowledge. And that installed base of knowledge requires a certain amount of reading and hard work and absorbing. And people are increasingly doing less of that because they think it's all out there. I can find it anytime I want. So if you have no installed base, it's like, if you don't have a skeleton, you can't flesh it out, right? You need a skeleton of information, basic information. And so the internet might be undermining that. And so that's the danger for attention and memory. So that's worth thinking about.
Another question?
Yeah, I'm trying to formulate a question around critical thought. But to me, I mean, I grew up as well started off with no television and saw this whole revolution. And for me, the more critical thought you have seems like an immunization against a lot of these threats, if you will, of the online world. I won't say that I'm not susceptible to some of it, certainly, but I think that it's important for all of us to have a certain level of critical thought and our own capacity to judge and analyze things. And I find that, or I sense that a lot of that is being eroded. How can we counteract that? Because I don't believe it's just education that gives us critical thought. I think it's an important factor, but I don't think it's the only factor. But I feel critical thought is eroded. Our ability to challenge and judge things effectively.
Can I ask you for an example of how critical thought has been eroded? Just a real world example, so I'll know what to respond.
Well, the fake news, for example. Okay. I mean, some of it is so outrageous, but yet we so easily... And I admit that during the election, I saw stuff that made me, sort of do a double take. I won't say I was fooled by it, but, it's like fishing, with... sometimes you can get duped into falling for these tricks, but some people seem a lot more susceptible to it, and I'm wondering if it's an erosion or if it's are the millennials or the digital natives, are they as susceptible to this as well, or do they have their own level of critical thought? Is there really an erosion of critical thought? Right.
It's a good point, and there's two levels to it. Broadly speaking, are people more, are people less? Are people taking less information into account to make their judgment and decisions? And the short answer to that is yes. I think so, because if you think back, the way people got information in the past was from television and newspapers, which were mass market products. There were 4 national channels that were middle of the road, that covered all sides of the story, more or less, from a centrist perspective. That was the main source of information. But after that, media has fragmented now. And so, the main television channel, their audience has shrunk. And now many people, including myself, I don't have television because I get my news from the internet now. Or I have Netflix. And so because of this fragmentation of media, it's become very easy to consume a basket of media which you have selected to be consistent with your views. So if you are a liberal person, you'll going to go to certain websites or go to certain TV channels only, MSNBC maybe. Whereas if you're right-wing, you'll go to Fox News and you'll go to Breitbart News. So it's very easy to curate and have a custom environment that reinforces your opinion. This wasn't possible before. It's very easy now. It's the most easiest thing in the world. So that's I think, one big issue now. It's very easy to create this bubble. People also, it's been shown that people are not just clustering in the virtual world, they're also clustering in the real world. So, there are different neighborhoods that, have similar opinions about politics and about culture, right wing, left wing, on language issues. So this clustering is a big deal, People are being surrounded by similar information. So that I think is a danger. because there's a confirmation bias. People are naturally inclined to seek out confirming evidence, and now people are only surrounded by confirming evidence. And so that leads to a problem, because now it's impossible for people to have a conversation across party lines because they're committed to their points of view. Regarding the millennials, there is a school of thought that if you're a digital native, then you're more aware of how the internet works. But I'm skeptical of that, because the research I've done, so in terms of the Google effect or the research that I've done on social media, what people post on social media and what emotions they experience, they're mostly with college students. So what I find is that browsing social media leads to feelings of envy, and that happens among millennials, among young people. They browse more on Amazon thereafter. So the data suggests that young people are also susceptible to many of these costs that I talk about in the book. Because human nature is the same. It doesn't change from one generation to the next. Human nature is a product of evolution, and the scale of change is very long. It's not one generation. So I think, in that sense, I think young or old, some of the way we think is the problem in certain ways. And the internet magnifies some of the weaknesses in the way we think. I don't know if this answers your question.
So I think this is all the time we had. So the book is called The Internet Trap. I know that it's amazing. It's been endorsed by my colleague Vito Piazza. I strongly recommend it. It's a lot of work to write such a book. I just want to congratulate you. I think that this is extremely useful, and as I said, the timing couldn't be more appropriate for the internet trap to come into the world. So congratulations, Ash, and thank you.
Thank you.